of the summer webinar series. Tonight's topic is moving ahead with XSL-FO style sheet customizations. Even though the title is different than the previous two webinars, it's pretty much the third part of our three-part series about customizing style sheets for PDF output. So don't worry, I'll explain in case you weren't able to join us one of the other times. But for those of you that were with us, and I think that's most of us, it will be building on the things we've learned earlier and moving forward with them. So since most of you have met me, my name is Adena Frazer. I've been with Suite Solutions for a few years now, serving various functions within the team, including giving webinars. You've seen the slides. Suite Solution supports the technical documentation cycle all the way, as they write here, from concept to publication, all the way from information architecture to custom output. So this is a little bit about the company. And now we're going to move forward to our plan for today. So we have a pretty ambitious schedule for today, as with the other times. We've already, in the first webinar of the PDF customization series, we talked a lot about generalities, overview, the processing cycle, and some basic principles of customization. Last time, yesterday, we talked about some more advanced customization, and we gave a number of case studies about lists, tables, the body of the document, related links, and several other items. So today we're going to continue with very specific case studies, trying to give practical real-life examples of what you can accomplish in customizations and how to do it. And we really have a range of different examples today. Some of them are going to be pretty straightforward, similar to what we've seen already, whereas other ones are going to be much more involved and complicated, either requiring a lot of technical XSL skill or a number of different steps in putting together different pieces. So what I tried to do today is I tried to organize it in order from simpler to more complex customizations, the idea being that everyone will hopefully follow the simple ones, and we'll see how much time we have left when we get to the more complex ones, and we can decide how much detail we want to discuss and get to the real complicated cases there. And at the end here, I put in a customization tips section if we have time. If not, it will be for reference. If we do have time, it's kind of wraps up some of the ideas we've been talking about over this three-part series in terms of practical advice for how to customize style sheets for PDF. Many of the items in that section we've already mentioned, so I thought it would be a nice review and kind of summary of the three webinars. And like I said, if we don't get to it, that's fine. You can always browse it at your leisure. So we're going to get right down to our first example. Okay, so the first example is how do we customize a style sheet to change the page orientation? Okay, our goal in this case study is to, again, change the page orientation from portrait to landscape. Okay, many of us have different documentation needs. Sometimes we want things to be landscape. Okay, so the first question is always, what are the relevant files, like we did last time? Which files control how the page looks? And as a result, which files do we need to change to make it look different? In this case, it's not that intuitive. There are two relevant files. One is the basic settings file, which we discussed way back 2 webinars ago, which has a lot of very handy, as the name indicates, basic settings, which make it pretty easy to change different aspects of the PDF output. So two of the items it can change are the page height and width, which will clearly change our page from portrait to landscape, for example. And that's in fact the simple method, is that if you want to change the page orientation for the whole document, all we have to do are change those two variables, the page height and page width, in basic settings. And by changing those dimensions, we can affect the change in the whole document. However, if you have more complicated needs than just making a change to the height and width for the whole document, you may need to go into the file that really takes care of it, which is called Layout Masters. And in Layout Masters, it has all the different page setups that you might need. You will see it has different masters for the talk, for the body, for the index, etc. And there you can do as complex a job as you'd like to in customizing different page layouts for different parts of the document. And the Layout Masters, as we mentioned a couple times ago, utilizes those global variables that are set in basic settings, which is why basic settings works in the first place. However, those global variables can be overridden to accomplish different goals. So just to give a quick example here. So I did the same thing I did yesterday, which was I set up some all the customizations already, and I'm going to show them to you one by one. And I know now we're aware of the lag issue, so I'm going to be watching on this little utility they have here, which shows me what you can see. I'm switching to the Data OT. I see you still have a lag, but right now I'm just going to start up startcommand.bat, which is how we always recommend that you open a command window, because it sets the environment variables that the Data OT needs to run. And I'm going to get all started with my build file. Don't worry, I'll stop to make sure you all can see it, but for now I'm just running. To start off, I commented out all the customization directories. So I'm expecting to see a very standard output of the sample data in the PDF, in the toolkit, hierarchy.pdf. So I'm starting this with an ant command. And I called my file build sample July 7th to be creative, .xml. And this should be running without any customization directories, just to kind of have a clean baseline for the changes we're going to make today. Okay. In this build sample file, by the way, in addition, I did comment out the customization section, but I did leave in the value for retain topic FO as yes, meaning I'm asking the toolkit not to delete the topic FO file, which is created prior to the PDF file. Rather, I'm asking it to leave it there so that I can use the FO file for viewing purposes. That's what I'm going to be doing now. Nothing important to see yet. I know there's still a lag. I'm going to go to my output directory and open up what I just built. By clicking on Topic FO, it opens up in the XSL Formatter program, which comes with Antenna House. It's their GUI interface. And I find it to be a very useful way of viewing the output I'm generating without needing to close and reopen the PDF each time. In fact, you can leave this open the whole time and just rerun the build and then refresh the output and you see it change. And those of you who were with us last time saw many examples of that. Okay, so here we have pretty standard output with the standard portrait page. Now I'm going to wait to make sure you can all see it before okay, here you can. Right, just standard out of the box, pretty much out of the box. I made some changes to the content. Hierarchy about our house maintenance tasks. Okay, so how would we go ahead and change the page orientation? So as I just said, we're going to do with a simple approach, because why not? And we're going to override, customize those two variables that I mentioned in this slide from basic settings. So just as a quick review, how do we customize something? One thing we have to do is we have to go to catalog XML. Oh, sorry, just from the beginning in case someone wasn't with us. The first thing we did is I created a new directory, which I called Customization July 7th in the Demo FO folder. Yesterday we created Customization July 6th, which is why I had to think of a new name for tonight. And that's going to be the location of all of our customized files. I'll wait a minute so that you can see it on my file system. Okay, it's highlighted. We're almost there, but not quite. There you go. Okay, so you can see, and this is an example of having multiple customization directories, one next to the other, and I can turn them on and off at will by sending in the parameter from the build file. So in our case, we're mostly interested in customization July 7th. Okay, another thing I had to do was in this file, there's a catalog.xml file, and I had to uncomment the lines in catalog.xml that were relevant to customizing attribute sets and customizing templates. Okay, now another step I had to do was go to the demo FO customization FO XSL directory, which is where all of our templates will sit. And I would have to change that custom XSL file to include any other files in which live customizations. Right now we're not going to open them because it's not directly relevant to our example. I'm doing this quickly because it's review from the previous 2 times, but I just want to make sure it's fresh in our heads and also for people who weren't here to give them a quick overview. What interests us now is this attributes directory, which is parallel to the template directory in that it also has a custom XSL file, which would contain the changed code, or would contain an include statement for other files which contain changed code. So as you can see here in my attributes directory, I have a few other files. I have basic settings custom, which is what we're going to look at now. And I have some other files, glossary and index, which we'll look at later today. Okay, so custom XSL, we're going to open it up. Okay, right now everything's commented out. I'll wait for your screen to shift. Maybe while I'm waiting, I'll open up the other file we'll need also. Okay, I think specifically going to Web Developer takes a very long time for the screen to refresh. So we just have to be a little bit patient. Okay, and what you will see as soon as the screen is shown is you'll see 3 include statements. Here they are, all of which are right now commented out because I want to unveil them step by step as we discuss our case studies. Okay, the first one we're going to look at is the basic settings file, which is parallel, obviously, to the out-of-the-box basic settings file. So I uncommented it. I appended the word custom to the name just to distinguish it from the out-of-the-box one. This way it's very clear, even if you have both files open, which one is the custom file, is the one you're changing, and which one is the standard file, which is the model, but not something that should be changed directly. Okay. So in my custom XSL file, I told it to include basic settings, custom. What, in fact, is in basic settings, custom? So I'm going to comment out something we'll get to a little later with regard to book maps. You can look if you want a sneak preview. But what we're focusing on right now is the section at the bottom, where basically we have 2 variables, one page width and one page height. Okay, so by default, our documents are taller than they are wide, right? So the default page width is 215.9 millimeters, which is 8.5 inches, and the default page height is 279.4. I realize you can't see me. I'm not sure why. There you go. So all we did is we switched them. We switched the values. So now we're wider than we are high. Instead of 8.5 by 11, it's going to be 11 by 8.5, which essentially affects the change to portrait. Okay, another thing you can do, I just kept it in here for fun since we were already looking at this file, is there's another global variable called page margins. So what you can do is you can say, well, maybe if I'm switching to a landscape view, it's because I need more screen real estate for some reason. So you can easily change the page margin, let's say from 25 to 15. I don't know how obvious it'll be, but we'll see. Or maybe even 5. Which is another very easy tweak you can make to make the layout of the page look very different. Okay, so all I had to do was change the values of these 3 files after I did all the other customization steps. And the last thing I need to do is in my project builds file, I need to tell it, hey, now we're going to use this customization directory. So I uncommented a line which sends in the customization.dir parameter with a value of customization July 7th. Okay, had I wanted to, I could have used yesterday's customization folder and called it customization July 6th, or from last week. But since we're doing today's webinar, we're going to use today's folder. Okay, now if I didn't forget anything, when I rerun the build, we're expecting to see the portrait page changed to a landscape view, with the page margins being much smaller. So I just reran it. Okay, I'm going to go back to my antenna house view. I'll wait for you till you all can see it. Okay, note that the margins are 25 millimeters, pretty big. And obviously we're looking at a portrait. Well, I am. I'll wait till you are. You will be seeing a portrait view. Okay, and now when I refresh the document, it has become a landscape view with much smaller margins. So you can see in my XSL formatter how it's already landscape, and note how close the text is from the edge. That's because I changed that value of the global variable from 25 millimeters as the margin to 5. Okay, so we have a very relatively quick and straightforward way to change the orientation of our page from portrait to landscape. And we also threw in an example of changing the page margins. Now, as I mentioned before, if you wanted to do something more complicated than this, let's say you wanted to change it for different sections of the document, have it appear differently, then you would have to go into the Layout Masters file and make changes there. I'm going to hold off on showing that to you now because I want to make sure we get to the other sections, other case studies. If there are specific questions about it and we have time, I'd be happy to open it and look at it with you at the end. Okay, so that concludes our first example about changing the page orientation of the document. I'll pause now for any questions or comments while your screen's reloading. And after that, we'll move on to the next example. Okay. If there are no specific questions or comments, we'll move forward. Waiting for it to, you should be seeing the customizing bookmark screen momentarily. Okay. Still waiting for the lag here. There we go. Okay, so our goal for bookmarks, wait, there's a question. How change body text margin and leave topic headings where they are at left margin? Okay. Meaning it would be great to see a change the page orientation of a single page in a document. Hopefully we'll have time at the end. Okay, so we have two comments about page orientation. The first one is, I think what it's saying is, tell me if I'm right, Steve, is can we change the body text margin and leave topic headings where they are? No, I don't understand. Oh, you want to indent the body text more than the topic headings? Yeah. Okay, so there actually is another variable in global settings that's supposed to do that. The reason I didn't show it to you is because I don't think it works. But it should, and that would definitely be a good bug fix if I'm correct that it doesn't work. I'll just show you quickly. If you go to Basic Settings, this is the out-of-the-box Basic Settings in CFG-FO adders. So in addition to the three variables I showed you, there's a variable called side column width, which is supposed to show you, it says the side column width is the amount of the body text is indented relative to the margin. So I believe, Steve, that's what you're looking for. Just, it won't help you so much if it doesn't work. So feel free to test it on your own, and if it doesn't, definitely log a bug into SourceForge to ask them to fix it. But that should accomplish what you wanted to once it starts working. Okay, John's question was, it would be great to see how to change the page orientation of a single page in a document. Hopefully we'll have time at the end. Okay, yeah, hopefully we'll have time at the end. I could spend lots of time talking about this, but I feel like we should move forward, and hopefully we'll have time to come back to it. Okay. Any other questions or comments about page orientation while we before we jump into bookmarks? Okay. So now you have to wait for your screen to refresh again, but I'm just going to tell you the goal before. There's nothing too important to see right now. Okay, so we have a pretty simple goal for bookmarks, which is that we want to determine whether the bookmarks display is collapsed or expanded. Okay, some people like the bookmarks to be all closed up. Some people like them expanded. You can also do a mix, so that's not what we're going to do now. So that's the goal. And so which files are affected? Again, this is something that can be set in basic settings, which is nice. It also can be set in the bookmarks.xsl file for more complicated formatting changes. But for our purposes, a combination of basic settings and or a special parameter in the build should suffice for us. Okay, so we're going to explore both options. One is if you want to change it for each build. Let's say sometimes you want your bookmarks expanded and sometimes you want them contracted, or you want to provide an option for the user to do one or the other. So that's possible with the Adena, the recent version, because there's a new parameter called args bookmark style that can be passed in the project build file. And if you want it, the default is collapsed. If you want it to be expanded, you have to set the value to expanded. It has to be in capital letters. I learned that the hard way today. To make sure it's expanded. So just to show you a quick example, in the PDF we just generated, now this one obviously I can't see using the topic.fo file because there are no bookmarks in Antenna House. You have to wait till you get to the PDF for that. So I'm actually going to go ahead and open the PDF that we just generated. Okay, and you will note that the bookmarks are in fact collapsed, right? Garage text, garage concepts, those other three are test data. I threw in for the glossary, so we will get to that later. But we have a nice short bookmark list. I don't think you can see it yet. Here you go. Now you can see it. Okay, let's say I want this to be expanded. So first of all, I have to close the PDF, because if I don't close it, when I rerun the Adena, I'm going to get a file open error, which means that it won't create a new PDF while the old one is still open. I need to close the old one. Now I'm going to go back to my project build file, and I'm going to uncomment this property I just mentioned, args bookmark style, and save it. While now I set value to be expanded. I don't think you can see it yet, but it's there. There you go. So I highlighted, it's that bottom row there, I highlighted the word expanded. I reran the Adena, and now I'm going to reopen it. We have a new copy right now, and you'll see that in fact, when you open the PDF, all of the bookmarks are expanded. Okay, so this is a way, like I said, you can change it anytime you run it by just changing the value of that property. Obviously, if you're interfacing with the CMS, you can also have the user pick via the CMS whether they want it expanded or contracted. I don't know how common that is, but that's possible. Okay. The other way to do it, on a more permanent way, is to change the default in the basic settings file. So you'll see here I pasted the little parameter that is in basic settings on the screen. And you can see that it's called bookmark style, and it says if that bookmark style is passed in from the project build file, and that's a different name, that's just because of the internal variable convention naming, not because it's a different parameter, then use whatever is there. So if we already passed in expanded, use expanded. Otherwise, if it's not passed in, make it collapsed. So another thing you can do is you can just change this otherwise to expanded, and then the default will be expanded, and you won't have to change anything in your project build file. You won't have to use the parameter at all. In fact, you should not use the parameter because it will override this default. That's another way to do it. I think I'm going to skip the demonstration because we already saw one and it's not so exciting, but this will also work. It's a more permanent way of customizing the bookmarks. Okay, so that concludes our quick bookmark example. If there are any questions or comments about bookmarks at this point, I'd be happy to take them. Otherwise, we'll move forward. Okay, so if there are no further questions or comments, we will continue. I'm going to go right into index. As I promised, we're going from simpler examples to more complex examples. So hopefully we've all warmed up by now. Okay, so here we're still on the pretty simple ones. The last two are the fun ones. Our goal here is to customize the formatting of the index title and group labels. Ed Hartman, can you set custom colors for bookmarks? I've never had that question before, so I'm not really sure. If there were anything in the document, you certainly can, but I'm not sure if Adobe gives you the ability to change the bookmarks within Adobe. It's an interesting question. Maybe some extensions would, like Antenna House or RenderX, but I'd have to check. I guess a place I might look would be the Antenna House extension section on the web to see, but I do not know offhand. But good question. Are there any other bookmark questions there? Okay, so moving to index. So our goal is to customize the formatting of the index title and group labels. Okay, so the relevant files this time are straightforward. They're index.xsl and index.adder.xsl. Now I put this note in because I was reminded of it when I was preparing, which was I put in some index terms in the out-of-the-box sample data, and I pressed render, and I said, hey, where's my index? And then I remembered that the reason I wasn't seeing an index is because that's a bug in FOP. I was using FOP as a rendering engine, and a major disadvantage to this option is that it does not, in fact, generate indices. And then when I switched to Antenna House, I saw the index appear right away. So that is just something to be aware of if you're planning on using FOP, and even if you're not, if you're giving a webinar and doing an example with it, you should also remember that. I figured it out pretty quickly. Okay, so what I'm going to do now, so just to demonstrate that, by the way, if you look at my open document, there is actually no index at the end, even though there are index terms in the document. So I'm going to close my PDF so it won't get in the way of my next build. And the first thing I'm going to do is just change it to Antenna House. The same document, no customizations. I'm just going to send in property name equals pdf.formatter, value equals AH for Antenna House. We discussed yesterday that that is the new improved simple way to change rendering engines by simply changing the value of this pdf.formatter parameter. The default is FOP for FOP, but you can also change it to AH for Antenna House or XCP for RenderX. Now if I rerun the document, same customization, is just this new parameter. I know you're still waiting for the screen. It's okay, it's not too interesting, it's just the and build file. Okay, now we can see, when you see the and build file, you'll see it's calling Antenna House targets. Well, maybe it's waiting because when it runs, the screen changes all the time. So I'll have to wait for it to finish running here. Okay, so you can see the screen changing. At the bottom, if you can see, is this PDF formatter. It's gray. Value equals Antenna House in the background. Okay, so now when I refresh this document, and I scroll down a little, we have our out-of-the-box index from the Ditto Open Toolkit. Okay, it's still landscape and it's still small margins just because that's what we did last time. And here's the index. Okay, so how can we make this look a little bit better? So we're going to go to the index files. And we're going to change a couple of attribute sets. The relevant attribute sets for our purpose, there's one called index label, which controls the formatting of the index title. You'll see it in your screen in a second. And there's one called index letter group, which controls the formatting of the group names. Okay, and the note I wrote here is that relatively minor changes in the attribute sets can have a big impact on the appearance of the index. And the specific changes we made were that we changed the color, spacing, and borders of the above attribute sets to give a new look and feel to the index display. Next to spacing, I have a list of different spacing attributes we changed: margin bottom, space before, space after, and padding top. Anyone who's worked with these customizations a little knows that there are many different ways of changing spacing and different ways have different advantages. Okay, but that's not our focus for tonight. So now, to show you the example, I'm going to go back to the file system, or rather, okay, fine, the file system. And I'm going to open up the index adder custom file in which we made the customizations. And you can see it's really not a lot of lines of code. It's a couple customizations in the first attribute set and 6 in the second with the different attributes that I mentioned. I'll wait till you can see it. No, not that. Next one. You can see there's a little comment in green, customizations, before the things we changed. It's easy to see what was changed. It's at the bottom half of each of the attribute sets. Okay, there's a question while we're waiting for our screens to refresh. Does Apache FOP? No, Apache FOP does. I think that's standard FOP. It does not support indexes. Okay, so now you can see my screen, customization, just, a few attribute sets on the bottom, a few attributes on the bottom here. Okay, now I need to remember to go back to my custom file and uncomment the include for this. Okay, so I'm going to say, tell it to include this file, indexadder custom.xsl, save it. I'm going to rerun the build. And hope that our index will undergo some sort of transformation for the better, or at least something different. Okay, I'll wait till you can see our old index on the screen before I refresh. There are many things you can, oh, here we go. Okay, refresh. Okay, so now we have some more designer style index entries. We've got some color going on, some border lines. We actually pieced together different styles from different places to give you this display. Okay, so again, we changed a few attributes and we have a whole different look for the index. Obviously, were we to change more, we could change the entries, we could change the nesting, which we don't have right now. But just a way to, I wanted to show you an example of changing the index style. Okay, there are many different things you can do with indices. You can change the group names, you can change what's in each group, but this is our example for tonight. If we have extra time at the end, we can always go back to more examples. It's looking like that won't be a problem. Okay, so that concludes our quick index customization example. I'll pause now if there are any questions or comments about indices or any of the previous use cases we did, case studies. And if not, we're going to dive in, or even if there are afterwards, we're going to continue to two, let's say, meatier examples of the glossary and the talk numbering. Okay, so the first three were pretty straightforward. Changing basic settings, passing in a parameter, changing an attribute set, and the last two are more involved. Okay, so our goal here for glossary, since there are no questions, I'm going to move forward, is we want to display a glossary using a data map. Notice I wrote displaying a glossary, not customizing a glossary, because there isn't really any glossary support right now in the plugin, in the FO plugin. So what files are we going to use? So we actually are going to use an existing file called root processing. I don't think I've mentioned it before, but as the name indicates, it contains like the basic template calls for the different pieces of the document. So it'll call a template called create index or create talk, etc. So we're going to call from there create glossary, which is a new template we're going to write. And additionally, we're going to need to create some new files. So we call them Glossary XSL and Glossary Adder, which will both help us generate glossary. Now, even though the FO plugin doesn't right now support glossaries, Adena does provide initial support for glossary entries. And the three main elements that it uses are gloss entry, gloss def, and gloss term. As the names indicate, gloss entry is basically the combination of a definition and a term. The official language on the website was it's used for one sense of a glossary term. And then gloss term is the term that's associated with that sense, and the definition is the definition associated with that sense. Okay, so those are the elements you need to use in the Adena. So displaying a glossary basically has two main sections to it that you need to do. One is steps to set up the Adena, and the other is steps to set up the code, the XSL. Okay, so we're not focusing on Adena tonight, so I didn't go into too much detail. But one way of doing it is you want to create gloss entry elements in your Adena source, and then you need to reference those elements using topic refs from the Adena map. Okay, so just to show you what I mean, I created a few glossary entries in my out-of-the-box sample Adena. So I made it a directory called Glossary. I have hose, lawnmower, and rake. I'll open one. Okay, and it's a very small file. The doc type is gloss entry. Let me wait to see if you can see it. And all it basically has in it is a gloss entry with a term and a definition. Here we go. Okay, so again, doc type is gloss entry. It's referencing the glossary DTD, which exists, and it has in it one glossary term. I believe you can also put a number of glossary terms in a database, but I didn't do it that way this time. Then in my hierarchy map, I referenced these glossary files at the end. So I just made separate topic refs, one for each glossary entry with a type of concept. Okay. So you can see it down here. Make a little circle while you're waiting. Okay. That's how I set up my Adena. I made special separate files for gloss entries. And then in my Adena map, I referenced each of these files using a topic ref. Not everyone can see the screen, so I'm going to wait a little longer. Okay. So that was the easy part. The next part is the harder part, which is that we're going to need to put in code which tells the Adena, the PDF plugin, to reference these elements and display them as desired. Okay, so that's the next step. Okay, so there are different ways to do this, but this is kind of following the structure of the existing plugin. So the way to do it would be to create a Glossary Adders XSL file, which contains formatting for gloss defs and gloss terms. And then we also want to create a Glossary XSL file with a create glossary template that does two things. One is it gives us a title for the page if the document contains gloss entry elements. And the other is that it displays the glossary terms and definitions based on the attribute set formatting. Okay, so pretty much what we'd expect. We need to create an adder file, an attribute set file with formatting, and a template file with processing. And because I had some extra room and I thought it was relevant, I put in not all of the templates, but one of the main templates that catches these elements, right? You can see it matches on gloss entry. So it will pick up any gloss entry defined in the data. And then within the gloss entry, it applies templates for gloss terms and gloss defs. Okay, so that's the first thing we need to do. And we in fact did that. Okay, I'll show you the source example. Okay, so I'm going back to my customization July 7th directory. I'm going to open up a Glossary custom file, which has the custom templates. And you can see when you see the file that it has exactly what I just described. I don't know how easy it will be to review the code at this level of depth because it's not so few lines, but I'll just give you the overview once you can see it. The top level template is called Create Glossary, as I recommended, although the name obviously isn't so crucial. What it's basically doing is it's creating a new page sequence and putting in the word glossary there. Here, I'll use the highlighter so you could see. Okay, this is the Create Glossary template. So it's doing two things. One is it's putting in a block with the word glossary. And the other thing is it's calling in apply templates, where it's saying apply templates to glossary elements, to gloss entry elements. Okay, that's the first part. Now the next thing it's doing is, this is the template you saw in the slide. It's matching all glossary entries. It's saying once you're in a glossary entry, so call a template that works on gloss term. That's this next one. And another template that works on gloss def. That's the final one. Again, the templates are pretty easy, pretty straightforward. They're basically creating a block and applying those attribute sets that are defined in glossary adders. You can see there's a use attribute sets call, which is calling a gloss def attribute set and a gloss term attribute set. Okay, so I know it's a lot of code, but I'm just trying to give you the structure, right? We have a main template called Create Glossary. Now I get to use the spotlight. Create Glossary, which matches the gloss entries. Which is processing on the document. If there is a gloss entry, it gives us a new page sequence, which will start a new page. It gives us a label, the word glossary, and then it calls templates on gloss entries. Okay, that template that it calls, the next one matches a specific entry of a glossary on line 18. And then it calls new apply templates on a term and a definition. And the term and the definition are the templates that follow. Okay, all the details aren't so important. I mean, I don't want people to get lost in the details. So if you're following and you've done this, or if you've wanted to do this, that's great. If you're not, I'm trying to explain, I guess, a more complicated way of customizing, which involves several templates and attribute sets and other code changes. And just giving you like a big picture idea of how you would approach this. Okay, so that we're not there yet, though. That was the first step. Okay. Then we also have that attribute set file I told you about. That's pretty straightforward. Okay, and it has, as we would expect, two attribute sets. One for the glossary term, which says the font size and the line height and the family, etc., and the spacing and the color. And one for the definition. This is just saying how to format that glossary entry. Okay, so I'm just to review while we are waiting for the screen to refresh. So far, to set up a glossary, you've done two main things. Thing one was setting up the data using gloss entries, gloss terms, and gloss defs. The second thing was beginning to set up the XSL by having templates that catch and process the glossary entries and attribute sets that define the formatting. Okay, now before I forget, I'm going to uncomment these files in the custom file so we'll remember, so it will know to use them. Where to go? Okay, so here I'm uncommenting the attribute set one in custom XSL for attributes. And I'm going to uncomment, it's kind of funky. I think I lost the custom file. Why isn't it letting me open it? Okay, and I'm going to uncomment the glossary custom file. Okay, that's what we've done so far. But wait, there's more. The next thing we need to do is we need to call this function, right? We created the template, but we didn't actually call it from the DITA-OT yet, from the FO plugin. So as I mentioned earlier, the location from which we're going to call it is this root processing file, which creates different parts of the document. So that seems like a logical place to put in a call to our create glossary template. Okay, to avoid switching the screens, I'm going to read the last 3 steps here, and then I'll show you on Web Developer. Okay, the next step is, because now this would be different if we were doing it in a book map, but since we've been using a DITA map, I decided to demonstrate it in a DITA map. So if you remember, the way I included it in the DITA was I included topic refs to each glossary entry. So far we've taken care of displaying these DITA elements in a glossary format with all these functions, with all these templates and attribute sets. What we haven't done is taken care of removing them from the document. We don't want them to appear in the document as separate topics and then again in the glossary. We want them to only appear in the glossary. So the way you remove them from the document bodies, you need to filter them out by overriding templates in comments. So we actually did this. It was like a couple lines of change, but basically where it processed the topics, we said if it's a glossary, label it as a separate kind of topic. And where it output the topics, we said if it's a glossary topic, don't do anything, because we knew we would take care of the display using our special glossary templates. Likewise, besides getting it out of the main body of the document, you'd also need to write something to filter it out of the talk and the bookmarks. You actually need to do 2 things for those. You need to get rid of them from each term. You don't want each term showing up as a separate item on your talk or a separate item in your bookmark. But you'd also probably want to, yes, display the word glossary in both the table of contents and the bookmark, so you'd have a way to get there. So this actually we didn't do just because it was getting too complicated, but you would have to do this to complete the process. Okay, so I want to show you what I mean by each of these items. Again, I'm going to show you where I call the templates that we wrote. So if you go to, here's the root processing custom file that I mentioned before. You can see, or you will be able to see soon, there are a whole bunch. There's create layout masters, create bookmarks, create front matter, create talk. So right after that, and there's an apply template, so right after that we put in a create glossary template, which is calling that glossary we created earlier in glossary.xsl. And then following that is a create index template. By the way, parenthetically, this is a good file to use for development and testing. Let's say you're only working on one section of the document. You can comment out some of these call templates so that it only generates the glossary, it only generates the index, and just saves you processing time from generating all the output every time. So just another customization tip, which shows up in our last section that we're not going to get to tonight. That's okay. Okay, so that was step number 3, if you remember. Now we need to also filter out the output from the rest of the document. I think in the interest of time, I'm not going to show you all the code, but I am going to include the code in our custom file. So what we did is we overrode commons to filter out that code. Just want to make sure there's nothing else in commons that is going to mess us up. Sec. Okay, no, just that. Okay, so assuming I did all the steps right, when I rebuild our sample, we shouldn't see these 3 separate pages with the glossary entries. Instead, we should see a nicely formatted or somewhat nicely formatted glossary after all our hard work. So I just I'm rerunning the Data OT, and I know you're waiting to see the screen. Right now it has the old version of our glossary topics on it. I would assume that at some point someone will put this in the plugin as part of the default, but right now it's not there. Okay, so you can see this is the lawnmower. This is a topic that was created from my glossary topic, but isn't actually the glossary. So when I refresh, now instead of having these separate topics, we have the word glossary, which is actually formatted like my index, and 3 entries from my 3 files, lawnmower, hose, and rake. Okay, and as you can see, there's no longer separate topics that were generated from each of these terms. Okay, so I hope I didn't lose anybody with this. The goal of this case study was to explain how to display a glossary in a data map. Again, in a book map, this would be slightly different. The same basic idea, but slightly different code. And you wouldn't necessarily have to filter it out if you're using back matter. But in a data map, these were the steps. We created glossary data in different XML files. We included those files in the data map using topic refs. And then we adjusted the code. We created a glossary adders file which contained the formatting elements for a glossary. We created a glossary file which did the templates that caught the glossary. We called the glossary file the main glossary create glossary template from root processing, so it was integrated with the plugin. And then we provided filtering to get rid of these entries from other places in the document. And out came our glossary. Very involved, I warned you. I hope it was at least the main points were clear to everyone. Feel free to jump in with questions or comments before we go on to the next thing. Okay, either the silence means that I lost everybody or that everyone's happy. I hope the second. Any questions or comments at this point? Okay, I'm going to assume that everyone followed. Wait. We have a comment here. Does the XHTML do a glossary automatically? That is a good question that I also don't know offhand. Does anyone have experience with that? Otherwise I can check. Does I don't know. Good question. I have to write out my homework list again for this time. Okay, good. Any other questions, comments? Okay, moving forward. So it's last, which means it's pretty complicated also, but we'll see. Okay, the next goal is customizing the talk. And specifically, we want to display topic numbering for all levels of the talk in a data map. Again, this is slightly different for a book map. The book map by default has chapter numbering in a TOC, but not subtopic numbering. But since all of our examples were with this data map, I wanted to keep it in a data map. Okay, and this is not that, as opposed to the previous example, it's not so many lines of code, but it's pretty complicated code, which is why it's a different kind of case study and it's interesting. Okay, so here are the relevant files. There are only really one of them. Here I wrote 2, and they're pretty intuitive. It's the talk file and the talk adder file. And the notes I wrote just to warn us is that this is a complicated customization task which requires an in-depth knowledge of XSLT and XPath to do it efficiently. There are probably a lot of ways to do it not so efficiently, but to do a really good job of it is difficult and comes out pretty elegant. So luckily, Ruvain Weiser is a colleague of mine at Sweet Solutions. He wrote a very short custom template, which I think is very well written, which provides TOC numbering for data maps. And the reason I think it's relevant beyond this particular example is because this code can be expanded to work with bookmaps and more complicated data source. Right now it is not, for demonstration purposes we tried to keep it as simple as possible, but the algorithm can be built upon to accommodate more complex setups. So instead of showing you the code here, or maybe in addition to showing you the code, I wrote out the algorithm that he devised. Okay, and like I said, it's kind of elegant in its simplicity. You can say that about code. So he wrote up this TOC numbering algorithm. And it's pretty, like I said, straightforward. Basically, what he did was he wrote a template. I think he called it get section number. And what it does is it returns the TOC number for a given topic. Okay? Now this is a recursive template. So for those of you who have computer science training like myself, it will bring back memories, either pleasant or not as pleasant ones from your computer science courses. For those of you that don't, I'll just explain briefly. A recursive function or a recursive template is a template that calls itself. So it'll keep going until it reaches a stopping condition. So in this case, for top-level topics, that's the stopping condition. If you're at the top, then what it does is it returns the number of the topic in the current level by counting the preceding siblings and adding 1. So let's say in this very simple case, I have a document made only of top-level topics. It'll count, okay, I'm number 1. I'm number 1 plus 1, I'm 2 now. 2 plus 1, I'm 3. And it'll just number the topics sequentially. Now the catch is, let's say you have nested topics. You don't just have one level. You have subtopics and sub-subtopics, etc. So how do you know that I'm in, 1.3.2.5? How is it going to tell me that? So that's where the recursive part comes in. Okay? What it does is, it calls this, let's say if you're not at the top level, it will call itself. It calls its own template on the immediate parent of the current node. This will work recursively until the top level topic is reached. So let's say I'm in the node in the XML that's 5 levels down. It says, okay, in my level I'm number 3. What about my parent? So it calls the same function on the parent. It says, oh, the parent's only number 2. Then it'll call the same function on the grandparent. Say, well, the grandparent's number 16, etc. Okay, and then what it does is it concatenates, it joins together the number of the parent with the number of the topic in the current level with a period in between the two numbers. So in my example, it'll say, okay, I'm 16.2.3. That's how it'll know what my number will be for the table of contents. And then it returns that number. Okay, so that's the template. And then this template needs to be called from the template that creates the TOC. So I guess I'll show you the code briefly so you can see what I'm talking about. If you don't catch all the hopefully you got the basic idea. If you don't catch all the intricacies of the code, that's okay. It's very complicated. But hopefully my introduction will help a little. Okay, so this is the code. Get section number. Wait till it refreshes on your screen. And it's saying, okay, the first part is that stopping condition. It's saying if you don't have any ancestors that are topics, meaning you're the top level topic, then give me the number of your preceding siblings plus 1. Tell me where you are in your level. Okay, that's line 110 to 112. Okay, that's that first part that I was explaining in the slide. Otherwise, let's say I'm not the top level topic. I'm somewhere down in the topic tree. So then he called it supersection, same idea. He's saying for every ancestor you have, go and call this function. Go and call get section number and return to me the number of the ancestor. Okay? And then here it's returning the count plus 1. And then this last line here, 124, is concatenating the supersection number, let's say 16.2, with a dot, point, and the current section number, 3. That's where it's putting together the full number and returning it. And this template, again, is called from the template that builds the talk. Okay, so let me show you it in action. Question, why are you numbering talk entries if you're not numbering the topic titles themselves? You're also numbering the topic titles themselves. Oh, no, I'm sorry, you're not. Yeah, you could use this type of function also to number the topic titles in the document. Since the topic of this case study was the TOC, so I focused on the TOC. But you could use this similar logic to work throughout the document. Correct. And you could also use it in bookmarks to number the bookmarks the same way. Okay, good point. So now to show you it in action, hopefully. So we're going to uncomment our last file here, this talk custom file, in which lives our template. Okay, if you remember in our document, we have a boring old talk. Here, by the way, are the glossary entries which need to be weeded out if you finish the glossary customization. And now I'm going to rerun the code and demonstrate the numbering. I wonder if it'll go faster if I put that in the background. Let's see. Okay. I'll wait till you can see the old talk before I refresh the screen. Okay, here's the old talk. Refresh. This isn't too many layers, but you can see that we now have numbers 1, 1, 1, 1, 2, etc. from this elegant custom template that Ruben wrote. And the glossary entries, like I said, should be removed. They're not really they shouldn't be part of the talk. And I guess they weren't caught because they're not regular topics. Okay, if you have parts nested inside of topics, it can get more complicated, but this is the basic algorithm he made up, which should apply to more complex cases as well. Okay, so that concludes our talk numbering section, as well as all of our case studies for today. And as I mentioned in the beginning, I did include a customization tips section, which I'll leave for you to browse at your leisure. It's a review and a summary of other things we've discussed. Question, is this using Idiom FOP or Antenna House? Right now I'm using Antenna House because I set my PDF formatter to Antenna House to give me an index. This would come out the same with FOP as well. For the table of contents, the main difference was for the index in our case tonight. So just to wrap up, tonight we discussed a number of more intensive customization examples. We started off with some lighter ones, changing the page orientation, which we did using basic settings. We said a more complicated way of changing pages would be in Layout Masters, which unfortunately we did not have time for, but you can look there. We then moved on to bookmarks. We said, how do you make bookmarks expanded or contracted? We discussed two methods, one passing in a custom parameter from the project file. You have to write expanded in all capitals for it to work. That has the advantage of being able to change it on demand. The second, more permanent way of doing it would be changing the default in the basic settings file to expanded, for example. And we said you can do further bookmarks customization by customizing the bookmarks.xsl or bookmarks adder file. The third example we did tonight of case studies was for the index. First of all, we mentioned that FOP does not generate an index, so you need to use either Antenna House or RenderX. And then we showed how with relatively few lines of changes, by adding some new attributes in the index adder file, we can make the index look much, much different. We then moved on to our two more complicated examples, hopefully I didn't lose anyone, of glossary and talk numbering. Glossary was complicated because it involved a large number of steps and a large number of files. We talked about setting up the data correctly using gloss entries. We talked about setting up processing for the glossary using Glossary XSL. We talked about setting up formatting for the glossary using Glossary Adder. We then said you'd have to have additional changes to call the glossary function from root processing and to weed out the glossary entries from the body of the document, the talk, and the bookmarks. And we said if you'd be putting a glossary in a book map, it would be slightly different, but you'd still have to do many of these steps. And finally, we ended up with a case study that was difficult, but for a different reason. It wasn't something that required a lot of changes to a lot of different files. It was something that required pretty much one change to one file, or two changes, if you count two templates, to make the numbering appear in the TOC in a Adena map. But the reason it was hard is because it was a very complex way of coding. It involved having a recursive function which called itself to get the numbering right. And we demonstrated how that does in fact add numbers to our table of contents in our Adena map. And as Ed said, you can, if you're going to be numbering the table of contents, you'd probably also want to be numbering your bookmarks maybe, and definitely your document body. You can use a similar kind of logic to provide numbering for the document body as well. And that concludes our webinar for today. I'll be happy to stick around for a little bit and answer any more questions. If we have time, we could quickly try to look at some of the earlier ones. I'm not sure we'll have enough time to do it justice, though. But certainly, if there are any other questions, now would be a good time. Okay, I'm going to stop the recording here. And if anyone wants to stick around who asked a question earlier, we can try to spend a few minutes looking at it.